A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, on this time on a Thursday, we like to connect with Christian social commentator David Robertson. He's back with us. David writes for newspapers and magazines. He's an author. He's the minister of the Scots Kirk Presbyterian Church in Newcastle in New South Wales. And his insightful blog's called The Wee Flea. You can catch that at theweeflea.com. David, a special welcome back to 2020.
Yeah, my privilege to be with you.
Dave, the effects on the world. I mean, this is a big way to talk about the Trump effect, having won the US presidential election, and he's not in the seat yet. Got to wait till the 20th of January, but already the tides are turning, and there's all sorts of movements at the station. Give us your thoughts here. If we start with something really big, I mean, is this something that will affect the whole world, or is this something that's just localized to the US? How do you see the Trump effect here?
Well, it certainly affects the whole world because America is by far the biggest economy. It's the strongest military power. And if we were, for example, to end up in a world war, which was a nuke, the impact of the stuff on climate change affects us. American media is dominant. The American church is very strong. And so basically everything that happens in America has a ripple effect. I mean, I like to think that when something happens in Scotland, it impacts the rest of the world, but we're slightly more subtle. This is something that is unquestionably going to impact Australia and throughout the world.
Interesting, isn't it, to include the American church in a way that there'll be an effect of a Donald Trump presidency. And we might get to talk some more about that, because anytime you listen to mainstream media, you're only ever hearing about the consequences, around trade or climate change, the influence of the US on the rest of the world. So I guess there's a lot of mainstream media that misses some of the dynamic that happens when you've got Christians in the mix.
Yeah, I think so. I think they, sometimes they see the world through very narrow glasses. Now, to be honest, I think sometimes, Americans see the world through narrow glasses, but then so do the rest of us. I mean, media on the church is quite significant as well, but it's really the bigger impact on the society, which itself has an impact on the church, that concerns me more, or maybe gives some hope as well.
And, Donald Trump has been, in his first term, back from 2016 to 2020, he's been someone who has championed the issues that the church has stood for. Do you think that he'll be as strong in his championing some of those issues, those ethical, moral issues that he has stood for, that the church has in some sense moved in behind him? Do you think he'll be as strong in those in this next term?
I think he's championed some of them. In others, I don't think he has at all. So I think we need to be quite careful about that. I think obviously the main one was, and something for which I will forever be thankful, that when he appointed 3 Supreme Court justices, that dealt, it was a big blow for the pro-abortion case. And that for me is highly significant. But I mean, I'm not convinced. I'm personally not convinced that he's all that against abortion himself. I think he made a kind of deal with evangelicals, as far as he was concerned, that this is what he was going to do. I think for a while, he indicated in Florida, for example, with the Florida thing, that he was going to vote for the amendment that would have allowed abortion. Then he announced that he wasn't going to do it, which I think was a wise political move. But I think that did indicate where he's coming from. So him personally I don't know where he stands on these issues, to be honest. But politically, I think it's good.
Interestingly, when you are a political leader, world leader, you might say leader of the free world, and when it comes to the issue of abortion, do you think he might even feel like he's done his bit because the issues around that Supreme Court decision to overthrow the Roe versus Wade and put the responsibility in the hands of the states, do you think that he will say, I've been there and I've done what I can there, it's up to others to now fight that good fight?
Yeah, I think so. I think returning it to the states was the big issue there. I think there are one or two other issues that I'd be quite hopeful about. For example, his comments on men and women's sports, the whole transgender issue. I think he'll be pretty strong on that. I think that is an important thing. I don't know what will happen in terms of the US economy, but there are aspects of, how will I put it? I wasn't a big fan of either of the candidates in the US election, but I have to say this. I probably would have been doing my own little YMCA dance if you've seen that when he won, because the thought of Kamala Harris winning would have been an absolute disaster in many, many ways. I'm sure of that. I'm absolutely sure of that. So basically what I'm saying is I don't know with Trump, and who knows. And with Harris, I kind of felt that I did know. I knew that it would be an absolute disaster. So I think the Lord has preserved us, to be honest.
As you say, around issues, the transgender, men in women's sport, even more broadly than you could say, wokery, the whole issue around what's woke and what sets itself up as what I often will say is diametrically opposed to where Christian positions typically stand. But the way that he approaches wokery, that's going to have a significant effect because it'll overflow the shores of the US and it will reverberate around the world, won't it?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, there are some areas of American society which I think are too far gone, particularly the elite institutions, academic institutions. But there's been such a pushback against that. And I think you'll see that reverberate in Australia. And it's very interesting watching how many people during the election, and so many celebrities and most of the media, I think it was 100 out of 100 of the top CEOs were all supporting Kamala Harris. So the establishment was really very much behind her. And she lost. And since then, more and more people are coming out and saying, no, we don't have to go along with this. And I do think that will have an impact in our country here in Australia as well. So again, I'm thankful for that. I mean, I don't want to overemphasize it, and I think we need to be careful because when we talk about being woke and so on, there are aspects of it that are not bad, but there are many aspects of it that are incredibly restrictive and harmful and anti-Christian.
Big picture things, the Trump effect on the world. A thought or two, perhaps. Trump has promised to end the Russian invasion of Ukraine in a single day, yet to be seen. And perhaps there's a reason for an exaggeration there because I'm sure the complex issues are not easily resolved. And then, of course, there's the Middle East conflict as well. But there are wars that are going on around the world, and there's lots more wars than just those two that seem to dominate the headlines. What do you think of his effect on the wars that are happening around the world? Is there likely to be a Trump effect that will cause those leaders to draw back?
Absolutely. I'm one of the reasons if I'd been an American, I would have voted for him was because I think if Kamala Harris had come into power, there would have been increased likelihood of a greater war in the Middle East, and even more so, the Ukraine war developing into a world war. I think my view at the moment is that one of the things about Trump is how unpredictable he is, and that makes him, to Putin and Xi Jinping and others, they're very, very wary of him. I've been absolutely horrified the past couple of days to see Joe Biden, who can hardly string two sentences together. And if you saw him yesterday, wandered away into the jungle after announcing that Storm missiles were to be allowed to be fired from American and UK missiles were going to be fired from Ukraine into Russia. that's such an incredibly dangerous thing to do. I really was astounded at that. And then he announced that they were going to allow them to use landmines, which in most countries in the world are illegal, not in the US. And again, that's an escalation of that war. And I just wonder why he did that. I wonder who's pulling the strings. I wonder what's going on. But I think the Ukraine situation is, for me, an absolute no-win situation, whatever happens. Because if Ukraine starts winning, then we'll end up with nuclear war. And if Ukraine loses, then it's going to end up about 12. The thing I hope for is that I don't think he'll end it on day one, but I think he will encourage and ask for a ceasefire. And I really hope that happens. And Israel and Gaza, it's very interesting what's already happened. Hezbollah, who are basically commanded by Iran, have started seeking a ceasefire and a peace with Israel. What's interesting is irrespective of what's going on in Gaza. Now, that's the first time that's happened. And again, I do think that's the Trump effect. And I think if Harris was coming into power, we would have seen a step up from Hezbollah, not a step back, and they've taken a step back. So for me, those are good things, although who knows where it's all going to end.
So you've had Trump, who is and still maintains that ground of being very pro-Israel, talking through the Gaza conflict and Hezbollah. You had Harris, who was perceived to be less pro-Israel, but the more pro-Israel and the, as you say, Trump being unpredictable, that actually is one of the powerful weapons, do you think, in his own diplomatic sway here? This unpredictable nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And depends the kind of advisor he gets around him as well. So it's very interesting. It's a former Baptist minister, Mike Huckabee, who's been appointed as his kind of envoy to Israel and to that area, on which that itself is fascinating. But could well imagine, you see, Israel would be in enormous trouble if America stopped funding it and stopped providing it its weapons. So he has enormous sway over Benjamin Netanyahu. And I do think, much as there are things that you may not like about Trump, he is one of these guys who says, I'm going to get a deal. I've got to get a deal. And if he wants to, he could really, really push that, the power he would have with Netanyahu. And I do think also with Iran, who will be very, very scared of him because they don't know how he's going to react and how he's going to respond. And so I think this is good, actually.
Money talks. So big money from the US, the effect on the Middle East, the effect on Ukraine and Russia. Hey, what about broadly across Europe? Because with those threats that Trump has made, for those European nations, pay for your own security here because there's a US withdrawal of that level of security and more responsibility onto the shoulders of European leaders. What do you think? And, this is your old stamping ground too, so you might have a good insight here around this. What do you think the Europeans are thinking about the Trump effect?
Well, I think two things. First of all, I think that it's quite right that people should pay for their own defense. I think Europe, like Australia, has too long been sheltering under America's power. And Australia is going to really struggle to play catch-up. And our old friend Greg Sheridan, writing in The Australian, has written some excellent articles on that. However, there's a negative side in terms of Europe. The European Union, the technocrats who run it, are desperate to have a European army. And I think that this is the direction that they are going to go. I think that they're going to try and use this to say we need to pull away from America if we possibly can. Now, I don't think they can. I don't think they have the ability to do that. And I think an army as such won't be able to fight a major world war. It won't become that kind of power. But I do think it will be a strong power within Europe. I mean, there's so much going on in Europe because Germany's in decline, which is astonishing. France could elect Italy's gone a different route. Hungary's gone a different route. The far right are basically rising, and not just the far right, but what I would call just normal conservatives as well, are rising in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in the Scandinavian countries, the other Scandinavian countries, as well as in Eastern Europe. So, I mean, the world's in a huge mess, and we don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I just think from a Christian perspective, I'm glad that my faith is not in any politician, but my faith is in Christ. However, I do see God's hand at work in some of the events that have been occurring recently. And I'm not saying that Trump is God's anointed. I don't believe that. But I do think that the Lord has shown us mercy and shown the United States mercy in in Harris not getting elected.
So Trump has a very firm, and it's so well known now because the voters in America and the world has come to know that there is a policy called America First. And that's going to affect NATO. It's affecting everything from the Iran-Israel conflict to perhaps even all the other conflicts in the world. But what about China here? Because Trump's America First approach there in China, that actually has some significant effects too, and then into the conflict and the tensions between Taiwan and the South China Sea. America First withdrawing some strength into that region may actually have some significant effects, and even here on Australia. What are your thoughts about the Chinese relationships that are likely to maybe deteriorate under a Trump presidency?
Well, I think what's interesting there is they may deteriorate or they may not. I actually think that if Trump does have a strong policy, it may deter Xi Jinping and others from invading Taiwan, which is, of course, the big thing at the moment. But China is also putting huge amounts of money into other countries. So, for example, in Peru, they've opened this massive Pacific port, which is, in effect, owned by the Chinese. And I think it was very interesting to me to see a photo of Xi Jinping, Anthony Albanese, I think it was Macron and Trudeau all holding hands at this latest summit. And Australia, I mean, maybe this is embarrassing for Albanese or maybe it's not, but Australia has been praising Albanese as an ideal Western leader. I'm not sure that's a place I would want to be in. And it seems to me that Australia, when it comes to the option of China or America, we have to choose America. We can't choose China. And I think Trump will be pretty hard on that one for us. But I suspect that also will be a good one for us because I don't think that we can trust China. I really don't. I mean, I've been reading Kevin Rudd's latest book on China. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I think China is by far the biggest threat to world peace. China and North Korea are by far the biggest threats to world peace that we face at the moment.
And so with that remaining focus on China, because China is Australia's largest trading partner. So if there's a trade war that develops between the US and China, then we're actually likely to be on the very big losing end here. So no doubt it's a tightrope that our leaders are walking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we were on that tightrope anyway, because when Scott Morrison reacted so strongly during COVID, I mean, the Chinese really punished us with about 20 billion worth of stuff. But on the other hand, you see, the Chinese need what we've got. They need our coal, and they need particularly our iron ore. And that gives Australia a great deal of leeway in dealing with China. So, it's a very, very fine balancing act. You would be a very foolish person to say that you knew what was going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. And I do bring it back in terms of my Christian faith to, saying, well, look, the Lord is in charge of all of these things. And, human nations, they rise and fall, leaders rise and fall. And I think one of the lessons from the American election is the hubris that was shown by the Harris campaign, thinking that because they had all the celebrities that they were going to win. Well, that's not how this works. They had $1 billion, nearly 3 times what Trump had. And they still didn't win with that. So that's really encouraged me. I have to tell you, one other thing that's really encouraged me is on the free speech side, that I think Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter was far more significant than most of us anticipated, because he did preserve free speech. And it's very interesting, in Australia, it looks as though the government's misinformation bill is about to fall, which from my perspective, is a very good thing, because I just thought that was a very, very dangerous piece of legislation.
Well, you remind us that while there is a battle, the Lord God Almighty is ultimately in control, but we're a part of the battle just the same, because these things can overtake us if we're not diligent, if we're not vigilant around those issues that actually bring harmony to a society. Hey, we have run out of time. There's be a lot more things we could talk about, but wonderful getting your insights as always, David Robertson. And is there any article that you've written about any of this of recent times that listeners can access?
Yeah, I've done a few things on my website, but I'm just trying to think what I've got. I was going to suggest something that I read, which was Os Guinness's book on civilizational moments. I think the most significant thing I really did was my latest couple of podcasts, Quantum of the Wee Flea. They do a post-election analysis, and there's a kind of an election special as well, and it gives a lot of this kind of stuff in there. That's probably the most significant thing. Okay, for listeners connecting with David Robertson, theweeflea.com, theweeflea.com, and the book he's recommended, read Os Guinness, Civilizational Moments. A great getting your insights as always. David, thanks so much for being with us again on 2020. No, my privilege, and God bless America, God bless Australia, God bless the UK.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.